Your morning is the foundation of your day. It sets the tone for everything that follows. But what if I told you that your routine might be pushing you further from God instead of drawing you closer? Many wake up and the first thing they do is check their phone, social media, emails, news. They fill their minds with the noise of the world before they even acknowledge the one who gave them brew. Distractions replace devotion. And suddenly God becomes an afterthought in the very day He created for you. When you prioritize everything but Him, you unknowingly disconnect from His presence. You start your day in your own strength, relying on your own wisdom. And what happens? Anxiety, stress, and frustration take over. Because whatever fills your mind first will lead your life. Your morning is the foundation of your entire day. It sets the trajectory of your mindset, emotions, and actions. What you do in the first moments of your morning determines the kind of day you will experience. It influences your thoughts, your decisions, and even your spiritual connection. Many people underestimate the power of their morning routine, assuming that it has little impact on their overall life. But the truth is, the way you start your day shapes everything that follows. When you wake up, your mind is in its most impressionable state. Your thoughts are fresh, untainted by the demands of the day. This is the most powerful moment to set your focus, to decide what will have your attention and energy. The first thing you expose yourself to in the morning becomes the dominant influence on your thinking. If you begin your day with worry, stress, and distractions, you carry that same energy throughout the day. If you begin with clarity, peace, and a focus on God, that foundation will sustain you no matter what challenges come your way. Many people wake up and immediately reach for their phone. The first thing they see is a flood of notifications, social media updates, emails, messages, news headlines. Before they even acknowledge God, their mind is already consumed by the noise of the world. They unknowingly allow external voices to set the tone of their day. They start their morning reacting instead of aligning. The moment they let notifications, worries, and distractions take the first place in their minds, they lose control over the direction of their day. God designed mornings as a time of alignment. It is the quietest, most sacred part of the day where distractions are at their lowest and your spirit is most receptive. This is why Jesus often withdrew early in the morning to pray. He understood that before the weight of the day set in, before people placed demands on Him, He needed to be in the presence of the Father. He didn't wait until the middle of the day when distractions were already fighting for His attention. He didn't wait until he was exhausted from the pressures of life. He started with the presence of God because that presence was the source of His strength. Your morning determines what fills your heart. If you begin with frustration, you will be more irritable throughout the day. If you begin with gratitude, you will see everything through the lens of thankfulness. If you begin with social media, your mind will be filled with comparisons and distractions. If you begin with prayer, your spirit will be centered on God's peace. Your heart follows whatever you give priority to, and whatever fills your heart first will dictate how you respond to everything that happens. Some people say they don't have time in the morning to pray, read scripture, or sit in God's presence. But the reality is people make time for what matters to them. If you have time to check your phone, you have time to pray. If you have time to scroll through social media, you have time to read the Word. If you have time to complain about your problems, you have time to worship the one who holds the solution. It's not about having time, it's about prioritizing what is truly important. The enemy knows the power of the morning. He knows that if he can distract you in the first moments of your day, he can influence the rest of it. He wants to keep you busy, preoccupied, and disconnected from God. He doesn't need to make you reject God. He just needs to make you ignore Him long enough that your heart starts to drift. And the easiest way to do that is by filling your morning with everything but His presence. Your morning is the most valuable time to establish spiritual authority over your day. When you wake up, you have a choice to let the world set your mindset or to let God shape your heart. You can either start in your own strength or you can align with the strength of the one who holds your future. You can allow distractions to dictate your focus, or you can choose to set your eyes on the one who gives life. Whatever you decide in the morning will follow you throughout the day. Prioritizing distractions over devotion disconnects you from God. It happens so subtly that most people don't even realize it. They wake up and immediately get caught in the cycle of busyness. responding to notifications, checking messages, scrolling through social media, and rushing into the demands of the day. Before they know it, the morning has passed and God was nowhere in it. The heart drifts not because people reject God outright, but because they replace Him with other things, giving their first and best attention to what doesn't feed their spirit. Distraction is one of the greatest weapons against spiritual intimacy. It doesn't require you to deny your faith and go away from God. It only needs to shift your focus elsewhere. The enemy doesn't always attack with obvious temptations. Sometimes he simply fills your life with enough noise that you no longer hear the voice of God. The more you prioritize distractions, the less space you create for divine connection. Over time, this leads to spiritual dryness, a sense of distance from God, and a lack of clarity in your walk with Him. Many people assume that as long as they believe in God, their relationship with Him will remain strong. But like any relationship, it requires intentional time and effort. You can't expect to grow close to someone you never spend time with. Imagine a person who claims to love a friend but never calls, never listens, never engages in conversation. Eventually, that relationship weakens, not because of an argument or conflict, but simply because of neglect. The same happens with God. The more you fill your time with distractions, the less room you have for Him. And without realizing it, your spirit starts to disconnect. Every day, people are faced with choices about what to give their time and attention to. Some wake up and immediately give their attention to work, emails, and schedules. Others turn to entertainment, scrolling through content that entertains but does not edify. Some get consumed by worries and anxieties, allowing fear to shape the way they start their day. In all these cases, devotion is replaced with distraction, and the result is spiritual emptiness. One of the most dangerous things about distractions is that they don't always look harmful. Checking your phone, catching up on news, responding to messages, these all seem like normal parts of life. But anything that consistently takes the place of your devotion to God becomes a problem. When your mind is more focused on the world than on the Word, you begin to lose spiritual sensitivity. When your heart is more drawn to entertainment than to prayer, you start to drift from the presence of God. God desires first place, not leftover time. He is not an afterthought, someone to squeeze in when it's convenient. Yet many treat their spiritual life as an optional part of the day rather than the foundation of it. They start their morning engaging with everything else before they engage with Him. And the result? A day filled with stress, confusion, and a lack of peace. The very things they struggle with could have been handled in His presence, but instead they tried to face them alone. The way you spend your mornings reveals what matters most to you. If something is important, you prioritize it. If you truly value your relationship with God, you won't push Him aside for later. Many people say they don't have time to pray or seek Him in the morning, yet they find time for everything else. They find time to scroll, to listen to the latest news, to respond to emails, to check social media. The issue is not a lack of time, but a lack of priority. When distractions take the first place in your life, they will shape your mindset, your emotions, and your decisions. The enemy understands the power of devotion, which is why he works so hard to fill life with distractions. He knows that if you start your day with God, you will walk in His peace, wisdom, and in authority. But if you start your day consumed with other things, you will be too drained to seek Him later. He doesn't need to pull you into sin to weaken your faith. He just needs to keep you too busy, too preoccupied, and too distracted to connect with God. Devotion is a decision. It is a daily choice to give God your attention before anything else. It is an intentional act of setting aside distractions to focus on what truly matters. Those who cultivate this habit experience the fullness of His presence, clarity in their spirit, and strength for the challenges of the day. But those who consistently choose distractions over devotion find themselves disconnected, distant, and struggling to hear His voice. The first thing you feed your mind will lead your life. Every day begins with a choice of what to consume first, and that choice determines the direction of your thoughts, emotions, and decisions. The mind is like soil, ready to receive whatever seeds are planted in it at the start of the day. Whatever you allow in first will take root and influence everything that follows. If you begin your morning with negativity, worry, or distractions, those things will dominate your thinking. If you begin with truth, peace, and the presence of God, your mind will be set on the right path. Many people don't realize how much power their morning habits hold. The first thing they see, hear, or focus on sets the foundation for how they will feel, react, and operate throughout the day. Some wake up and immediately check their phone, allowing social media, news, and messages to flood their minds before they have even acknowledged God. Others wake up with anxious thoughts, immediately worrying about tasks, problems, and pressures instead of finding peace in His presence. What enters the mind first has the strongest influence because it shapes the way the rest of the day unfolds. The mind is not neutral, it follows whatever it is fed. If the first thing you feed your mind is social media, you begin your day comparing your life to others, feeling either inferior or prideful. If the first thing you consume is the news, you start the day with fear, stress, and uncertainty. If the first thing you take in is work-related tasks, you begin the day in a state of pressure, rushing into responsibilities without spiritual alignment. But if you start with prayer, worship, and the Word of God, your mind is filled with faith, peace, and wisdom. What you put in first determines what will overflow throughout the day. God designed the mind to function in alignment with His truth. When it is filled with His Word, it is strengthened. When it is filled with distractions, it is weakened. The Bible teaches that renewing the mind is essential because the mind governs actions, attitudes, and emotions. When the mind is set on God, everything else comes into order. But when the mind is filled with the noise of the world, it leads to confusion, frustration, and a lack of direction. The first thing you focus on in the morning determines whether you will walk in clarity or chaos. Many people struggle with anxiety, stress, and negative emotions without realizing that their morning habits are contributing to the problem. They feed their mind everything but the Word of God and wonder why they feel distant from Him. They allow distractions to set the tone for their day and then wonder why they lack peace. The truth is, the battle for the mind is won or lost in the first moments of the morning. Whatever you allow in first will direct your thoughts, and those thoughts will dictate your mood, choices, and spiritual sensitivity. The enemy understands the power of the mind, which is why he targets it first. If he can fill your thoughts with worry, fear, or distractions at the beginning of the day, he can influence your entire direction. He doesn't need to pull you into sin immediately. He just needs to get you consumed with the wrong things. He knows that if you start your day with God, you will walk in His strength. But if you start your day in the flesh, you will struggle to find peace. The enemy fights for the first moments of your morning because he knows that whoever controls the mind controls the life. God desires to be the first voice you hear, the first presence you acknowledge, and the first priority you set. He wants to fill your mind with His promises, His wisdom, and His peace before anything else tries to take over. When you wake up, you have a choice to let the world speak first or to let God's Word lead you. If you choose to start with Him, your mind will be anchored in truth. But if you choose to start with distractions, you will spend the rest of the day trying to regain the peace you lost in the morning. Your life moves in the direction of your most dominant thoughts. If your first thoughts are filled with worry, your day will be shaped by anxiety. If your first thoughts are filled with gratitude, your day will be marked by peace. If your first thoughts are focused on the presence of God, your day will be filled with His guidance. What you feed your mind first is not just a small habit. It is a spiritual discipline that determines whether you will walk in faith or be led by distractions. Seeking God first aligns your heart and spirit. The way you start your day determines the direction of your life. When you wake up, your heart and mind are like a blank canvas ready to be filled. The first thing you seek becomes the foundation upon which your entire day is built. If you seek distractions, your heart will be scattered. If you seek God, your spirit will be centered. The difference between a chaotic life and life of peace is what you prioritize first. God has always called His people to seek Him before anything else. In Scripture, we see that those who walk closely with Him made time for Him first. Jesus Himself would rise early in the morning to pray, setting an example of what it means to align with the Father before engaging with the world. Before performing miracles, before teaching the crowds, before facing the challenges of the day, He positioned His heart in the presence of God. He understood that without divine alignment, human strength is not enough. If Jesus, the Son of God, made it a priority to seek the Father first, how much more should we? Many people struggle with stress, anxiety, and confusion because they enter the day unprepared. They wake up and immediately rush into the demands of life without centering their hearts. They engage with the world before engaging with God. They fill their minds with information but not transformation. When challenges arise, they feel overwhelmed, not because God is absent, but because they never position themselves in His presence. Seeking God first is not about religious duty, it is about spiritual survival. A heart that is not aligned with God is easily swayed by circumstances, emotions, and distractions. The heart was designed to follow what it treasures most. Whatever you seek first in the morning reveals what is most important to you. If the first thing you reach for is your phone, then digital noise has become your priority. If the first thing you check is your emails, then work has taken first place. But if the first thing you do is enter into the presence of God, it shows that your spirit longs for Him above all else. God does not force Himself into your schedule. He waits to be invited. He does not compete for your attention. He watches to see where your heart truly is. Alignment with God is not automatic. It requires intentionality. Just as a vehicle must be aligned to drive smoothly, your spirit must be aligned to walk in peace. A misaligned heart is prone to worry, fear, and doubt. But a heart aligned with God is unshaken by circumstances. This is why seeking Him first matters. When you enter His presence before anything else, you gain wisdom for decisions, strength for challenges, and peace that surpasses understanding. You are no longer reacting to the day, you are leading it with divine direction. Seeking God first also protects your mind from the influence of the world. Every day, countless voices compete for your attention, news, social media, entertainment, opinions, and pressures. If you allow these voices to speak before God's voice, they will shape your perspective. You will find yourself more influenced by fear than by faith, more led by emotions than by wisdom. But when you fill your mind with His Word first, it becomes a filter through which everything else must pass. His truth becomes your foundation, His peace becomes your guide, and His presence becomes your source of strength. Many people delay seeking God until they face trouble. They pray when problems arise, they seek His wisdom when they feel lost, and they turn to Him when everything else fails. But this is not alignment, this is desperation. God desires relationship, not just rescue. He wants to walk with you before the storm, not just in the storm. He wants to be the source of your daily strength, not just a last resort when you have exhausted all other options. Seeking Him first means you are not waiting for problems to push you toward Him. You are choosing to stay close to Him, regardless of what the day brings. The enemy knows the power of a heart that is aligned with God. This is why distractions increase the moment you decide to prioritize Him. Suddenly, your phone seems more urgent, your schedule seems too busy, and your mind is flooded with excuses. The enemy does not mind if you believe in God as long as you don't seek Him first. He knows that a distracted believer is a powerless believer. He knows that if he can keep you busy enough to neglect your time with God, he can keep you spiritually weak. This is why alignment is a daily decision, a discipline that must be guarded. Success is one of the most pursued goals in life. People dedicate their time, energy, and resources to achieving it. They wake up early, work long hours, and push themselves beyond their limits, believing that if they can reach a certain level of accomplishment, they will finally be fulfilled. But the reality is that success, when it is pursued apart from God, is an illusion. It gives the appearance of prosperity, yet leaves the soul empty. Many achieve their dreams, accumulate wealth, and gain influence, only to realize that something is still missing. That missing piece is purpose, and true purpose can only be found in God. The world defines success by external achievements, money, status, recognition, and power. But these things, as great as they may seem, do not satisfy the deepest needs of the human heart. There is an emptiness that material success cannot fill. People chase after promotions, luxury, and influence, thinking that these will bring them happiness. But when they finally attain them, they still feel unfulfilled. This is because success was never meant to replace God. True success is not measured by how much you have, but by how aligned you are with your divine assignment. The danger of seeking success without God is that you may gain everything the world offers and still lose your soul. Many have climbed the ladder of success only to find that it was leaning against the wrong wall. They sacrificed their peace, their families, and even their integrity to reach the top, only to realize that the top was not what they expected. God created every person with a purpose. When people pursue success without consulting the one who designed them, they move in a direction that may seem right but ultimately leads to emptiness. Many individuals achieve worldly success, yet remain restless. They have the house, the cars, the career, and the applause of people, but inside they feel lost. That is because true fulfillment does not come from what you possess. It comes from being where God wants you to be. When success is sought apart from God, it becomes a burden instead of a blessing. People who chase success without Him often experience stress, anxiety, and pressure to maintain their status. They fear losing what they have worked so hard to build. This is because their success is built on human effort rather than divine guidance. When God is the source of success, there is peace because what He builds, He sustains. Many people think they are successful simply because they have achieved their goals. But the real question is, did God give you that goal? Did He call you to that position? Are you walking in alignment with His will, or are you just following the patterns of the world? Some doors open, not because they are meant for you, but because you force them open. A job, a business, or an opportunity that looks good on the outside may not be God's best for you. Without His direction, you may find yourself succeeding in areas He never intended for you. History is filled with people who had everything yet lacked peace. Celebrities, business leaders, and influencers who reached the pinnacle of success but still felt lost. They had the applause of the world but lacked the approval of heaven. The world teaches people to chase after success, but God calls people to seek Him first. When He is first, everything else falls into place. But when success is pursued without Him, it becomes a never-ending cycle of striving, achieving, and still feeling empty. Some people think that if they achieve enough, they will eventually feel satisfied. But worldly success is a moving target. The more you get, the more you want. The moment you reach one level, another one appears. There is no lasting fulfillment because human desires are never fully satisfied by material things. This is why so many successful people still struggle with depression, anxiety, and a sense of emptiness. They gained the world but lost themselves in the process. God never intended for people to struggle and strive to achieve success on their own. He designed success to flow from relationship with Him. When people align with His will, success is no longer a burden but a blessing. It comes with peace, clarity, and purpose. They no longer have to manipulate, compete, or stress about maintaining their position because they are walking in divine favor. Some people are so focused on achieving success that they neglect their spiritual life. They wake up thinking about business deals, deadlines, and financial goals, but they never stop to ask, God, what do you want me to do today? They pursue wealth at the expense of wisdom, and as a result, they build temporary empires that lack eternal value. God does not oppose success, but He is against success that takes you away from Him. If success pulls you away from prayer, devotion, and obedience, then it is not a blessing, it is a distraction. Many people assume that if something is successful, then it must be from God. But success without God can be a trap. The enemy is not just in the business of failure, he also uses success to distract people from their divine purpose. If he can make you busy enough, ambitious enough, and driven enough to ignore God, then he has already won. Some people believe they are blessed because they have money and influence, but blessings are not measured by material gain. They are measured by how much of God's presence you carry. Chasing success without God leads to a restless life. The world will tell you to hustle, grind, and work harder. But God says, be still and know that I am God. When you build with Him, you do not have to force things to happen. Doors open that no man can shut. Favor follows you, and success becomes effortless because it is not built on human strength but divine alignment. If God is not first, everything else falls apart. Life is built on priorities, and the foundation you establish determines the strength of everything that follows. When God is not at the center, every other area of life becomes unstable. People often believe they can balance life by organizing their schedules, managing their time, and structuring their responsibilities. But without putting God first, everything is built on temporary stability. No matter how much effort is put into maintaining control, eventually something will break. The reason many feel overwhelmed, exhausted, and unfulfilled is not because they lack discipline or effort, but because they have placed other things where only God should be. When God is not first, confusion takes the place of clarity. Life becomes a cycle of chasing after things that do not truly satisfy. People work harder, strive longer, and push themselves beyond their limits, Yet no matter how much they achieve, there is always a feeling of emptiness. This is because fulfillment does not come from accomplishments, wealth, or success. It comes from alignment with the Creator. The world teaches people to prioritize career, relationships, and personal ambitions, but when these things take precedence over God, they become burdens instead of blessings. Many people live their lives trying to fit God into their busy schedules rather than structuring their lives around Him. They pray when they have time, read the Word when it is convenient, and seek His guidance only when problems arise. This mindset creates an unstable foundation because God is treated as an afterthought rather than the source of life itself. When something other than God holds first place in life, stress, anxiety, and frustration increase. People become more focused on maintaining control rather than trusting His plan. The result is exhaustion because anything built outside of divine order requires constant effort to sustain. Relationships begin to suffer when God is not first. Many seek love, validation, and approval from people, hoping that relationships will fill the void only God can fill. They expect others to provide a sense of security, identity, and purpose, but no human relationship can replace the role of the Creator. When people put relationships above God, they end up disappointed because they place expectations on others that only He can fulfill. This leads to frustration, misunderstandings, and broken connections. Not because relationships are bad, but because they were never meant to take the place of God. Finances become unstable when God is not first. Many believe that financial security comes from hard work, wise investments, and strategic planning. While these things are important, they are not the source of true provision. When money becomes the priority over obedience to God, people make decisions based on fear, greed, or selfish ambition rather than divine direction. They work tirelessly to gain wealth, only to find that no amount of money brings lasting peace. The pursuit of financial success without God leads to stress, worry, and the constant fear of losing what has been gained. But when God is first, provision flows from His hands, and financial stability is no longer dependent on human effort alone. Health begins to decline when God is not first. Many people push their bodies to the limit, sacrificing rest, peace, and well-being in the name of success. They neglect the importance of spiritual, emotional, and physical health because they are too focused on chasing after their own plans. Stress increases, anxiety rises, and the body begins to suffer under the weight of an imbalanced life. The peace that comes from prioritizing God has a direct impact on overall well-being. When He is first, stress is replaced with trust. Anxiety is replaced with confidence, and exhaustion is replaced with supernatural strength. Purpose becomes unclear when God is not first. Many people spend years trying to figure out their purpose, chasing dreams and pursuing goals that they believe will bring them fulfillment. But without God, even the greatest achievements feel meaningless. The reason so many people feel lost, even after reaching success, is because they have built their lives around temporary things. They invest time, energy, and passion into careers, ambitions, and personal goals, only to realize that these things do not bring the fulfillment they expected. Purpose is not something people create for themselves. It is something God reveals when He is given first place. When God is not first, peace is replaced with pressure. People begin to rely on their own strength, constantly striving to make things happen. They carry the burden of their own success, fearing that if they slow down, everything will fall apart. This is why so many live with a sense of urgency, always feeling like they are running out of time, missing opportunities, or falling behind. But this pressure does not come from God. It is the result of a life that is misaligned with His order. When He is first, there is no need to force things to happen because His plans unfold in His perfect timing. Spiritual life begins to weaken when God is not first. Prayer becomes inconsistent, worship feels empty, and faith starts to fade. The connection with God that once felt strong begins to feel distant. Many people wonder why they no longer feel His presence, why their passion for Him has diminished, and why their faith seems weaker than before. The answer is simple: something else has taken His place. When other priorities consume more time, energy, and focus than God, spiritual life begins to decline. It does not happen overnight, but gradually as distractions increase, devotion decreases. Every area of life is affected when God is not first. The symptoms may look different for each person: stress, broken relationships, financial struggles, lack of purpose, declining health, or spiritual emptiness, but the root cause is the same. Life was never meant to function apart from the Creator. No matter how much people try to organize, plan, and manage their lives, when God is not at the center, everything eventually falls apart. When you disconnect from God, you step into struggle. Life was never designed to be lived apart from the Creator. Every breath, every step, and every opportunity exists because of Him. The moment a person begins to drift away, life becomes harder, not necessarily in circumstances alone, but in the way those circumstances are handled. The presence of God brings clarity, strength, and wisdom, but without Him, decisions become clouded, challenges feel overwhelming, and direction is lost. Disconnection does not always happen suddenly. It often begins with small compromises, missing prayer one day, neglecting time in the Word, allowing distractions to take priority. Over time, the connection weakens, and what once felt like an intimate relationship with God becomes distant. Many do not even realize it is happening because they are still functioning, still working, still achieving, but they are doing it without divine backing. They may still go through the motions of faith, attending church, speaking the right words, but internally they feel dry. When God is no longer the source of strength, human effort becomes the replacement. People begin to rely on their own wisdom, their own strategies, and their own abilities. This leads to stress, anxiety, and frustration because they are trying to carry burdens that were never meant to be carried alone. The peace that once came from trusting God is replaced by the pressure of making everything work on their own. They move from a place of rest in God to a place of striving in their own strength. The further a person drifts from God, the more vulnerable they become to the attacks of the enemy. The enemy does not need to destroy a person all at once. He only needs to separate them from their source of strength. Once that connection is weakened, he can introduce doubt, fear, and confusion. A disconnected believer is an easy target because they are no longer covered in the same way. They may still believe in God, but they no longer operate in the authority and power that comes from intimacy with Him. Decisions become harder when there is no connection to God. Without divine guidance, people rely on their own understanding, which is limited. They make choices based on emotions, external pressure, or personal desires rather than God's wisdom. This often leads to regret, unnecessary struggles, and detours that could have been avoided. The ability to discern right from wrong, good from best, and temporary from eternal is sharpened by time spent with God. Without that time, decisions become rushed, reactive, and misaligned with His will. Relationships suffer when there is disconnection from God. People begin to seek fulfillment from others rather than from Him. This creates unrealistic expectations, frustrations, and disappointments. When God is at the center of relationships, love, patience, and understanding flow naturally. But when that connection weakens, relationships become strained. Instead of drawing strength from God, people begin to demand it from each other, which leads to conflict and emotional exhaustion. Disconnection affects the mind and emotions. Peace is replaced by worry, joy is replaced by frustration, and confidence is replaced by insecurity. Thoughts become scattered, negative and doubtful. Instead of moving forward with faith, hesitation and fear take over. A person who was once bold in their calling begins to second-guess themselves. The security that once came from trusting God shifts into uncertainty. Over time, discouragement sets in, making it difficult to stay focused and motivated. Spiritual hunger begins to fade when there is disconnection. Prayer feels like a task rather than a privilege. Reading the Word becomes inconsistent. Worship loses its depth. The passion that once burned brightly starts to diminish. At first, it may not seem like a major issue, but eventually it becomes harder to hear God's voice. Without constant connection, the ability to recognize His leading becomes dull. It is not that God has stopped speaking, it is that the noise of life has drowned out His voice. Purpose becomes unclear when there is disconnection. A person may still be active, still pursuing goals, but without God's direction, their efforts become random rather than intentional. They may achieve success, but it will not feel fulfilling. They may reach goals, but they will not feel satisfied. Purpose comes from alignment with God's plan, and when that alignment is lost, there is a lingering sense that something is missing. The enemy's greatest strategy is not always to attack directly, but to create enough distractions to weaken a person's relationship with God. He knows that once a believer is disconnected, they are easier to influence, deceive, and discourage. He does not always use obvious tactics. Sometimes he uses busyness, success, or even seemingly good things to shift focus away from God. What begins as small compromises eventually leads to complete separation if not corrected. The effects of disconnection do not always appear immediately. Some people continue functioning for a while, relying on their own abilities. They may still be productive, still achieving, still maintaining an image of success, but internally they are running on empty. The strength they once had begins to fade. The wisdom they once walked in starts to diminish. The clarity they once possessed is replaced with confusion. The further they drift, the harder life becomes. Without connection to God, the ability to overcome challenges weakens. Small problems feel bigger, minor inconveniences feel like major setbacks, and obstacles seem impossible to move past. The strength that comes from knowing God is in control is replaced by constant stress. Instead of responding to difficulties with faith, they react with frustration and doubt. The difference between a connected life and a disconnected life is not the absence of challenges, but the presence of divine strength to face them. Many do not recognize how much they need God until they feel the weight of doing life without Him. The pressures of life become heavier, the battles become harder, and the burdens become unbearable. Without God, the mind is unprotected, the heart is unguarded, and the spirit is vulnerable. Struggles become overwhelming, not necessarily because the problems are bigger, but because the person facing them is no longer equipped with the strength and peace that only come from a deep connection with Him.